The Pentagon and CENTCOM are going after the Midas Touch network after Aaron Parnas broke some of the biggest stories regarding the horrific treatment of our courageous sailors and Marines aboard the USS Abraham Lincoln and the USS George H.W. Bush, the supercarriers right now in the Persian Gulf. Pete Hegseth is out there attacking us, saying that our reporting is fake news. CENTCOM made a post saying that our reporting is false, and then they tried to act like we were reporting on something completely else. Folks, we've been hearing from the military families. We've been hearing from the sailors and Marines themselves aboard these supercarriers. The situation is absolutely dire. I want to give a hat tip to Aaron Parnas, affiliated with the Midas Touch Network. He's got his own YouTube channel. I'm sure you know him on TikTok. One of the most incredible reporters out there today. Make sure you subscribe to his YouTube channel. He's been leading the way on this reporting. Also, hat tip to the Military Times, Stars and Stripes. MS Now has been doing great coverage on this as well. It's something we really need to pay a lot of attention to, because the way the Trump regime is treating our courageous sailors and Marines, it's exactly what Donald Trump had said about our service members. He called them suckers and losers, and this is how he's treating them right now. So by now, I'm sure you've seen our reporting. It was the top story on Drudge. Rotten meat, no milk. Troops detail life aboard the USS Abraham Lincoln. And we've heard from the family members of these sailors and Marines as they say, the Navy doesn't care about us. They are intentionally making us suffer, and the families know what's going on. Senator Gallego of Arizona, who himself served in our armed forces, he's a veteran. He responded to Pete Hegseth's attack on us. And Senator Gallego said, look, I'm in communication with a spouse who is forwarding me her husband's text messages. Stop lying and fix the problem. I'll play for you what Hegseth said in just a moment. But here's the post by U.S. Central Command CENTCOM. Over the past 48 hours, multiple media outlets have reported several false claims related to the USS
Mira este bastardo lisiado. No merece ser llamado una bestia. Tigre!
With a spouse who is forwarding me her husband's text messages. Stop lying and fix the problem. I'll play for you what Hegseth said in just a moment. But here's the post by U.S. Central Command CENTCOM. Over the past 48 hours, multiple media outlets have reported several false claims related to the USS Abraham Lincoln deployment to the Middle East. One report alleged 7 sailors died in a brawl aboard the aircraft carrier, and others recently suggested a spike in suicidal ideations. These reports are false. Fact, USS Abraham Lincoln has maintained among the highest crew re-enlistment rates, 84.4% of all aircraft carriers in the U.S. Navy. The sailors and Marines of the Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group remain resilient and resolved after more than 260 days at sea, 10,000 aircraft flights, and 1.5 million pounds of ordnance expended. No service members aboard the aircraft carrier have died, and the one sailor who fell overboard August 3rd was quickly and safely recovered. The rampant misreporting on Abraham Lincoln's historic deployment is a disservice to our men and women in uniform and their loved ones. No, your behavior is a disservice. Y'all are a bunch of treasonous traitors, in my opinion, the way you're treating our service members, and then making this despicable post right here. And I'll just break it down in a moment. But you said that accurately reporting what the family members are saying, what's happening, accurately reporting what the Navy sailors and Marines aboard these supercarriers are saying, that's actually patriotism, to tell the truth. And notice what they tried to do here. And you can see how they're lying and their tactics. They just think we're stupid. They create like a completely false premise that no one's really talking about. I mean, we've never reported, no one that I know is really reporting that there were 7 sailors who died in a brawl aboard the aircraft carrier. What we've been reporting consistently, and others have, is that there's been 6 or 7 service members who attempted to jump overboard, including one individual who did jump overboard because the conditions are so horrible. What we and others have been reported, with Aaron Parnas leading the way, is that the plumbing doesn't work. There's mold all over the bathrooms. The showers don't work. The service members are not getting the nutrition they need to stay healthy, that they're losing 20, 30, some are losing 50 pounds, that the service members feel horrible, that they are being linked to these war crimes that the Trump regime is engaged in, that they never know when this deployment's going to end, that they've been out to sea for nearly 9 months, and the Gerald Ford for basically a year, which returned in May, but the USS Abraham Lincoln, that morale is at an all-time low. So you're creating this. 7 sailors didn't die in a bar brawl. Okay, well, that's not the issue that's on the front page of Drudge that we've been reporting on. Then they say the U.S. Abraham Lincoln maintained among the highest crew reenlistment rates. Yeah, maybe before the ship went out to sea, you conned them, you frauded them, you defrauded them, exactly what Hegseth and Trump have done their whole life. Now you brought them out to sea, you made this deployment never ending. And so the enlistment rate, by the way, I don't believe any of the numbers coming from the Trump regime, which lies about every number imaginable. So I don't even believe that your numbers of enlistment and re-enlistment rates. But regardless, what does that have to do with the fact that they've been deployed for nearly 9 months right now and that the conditions are horrible? It has nothing to do with it. You just think, oh, 84.4%, that's going to make people go, oh, they must be, the reports must be wrong. No, we're not stupid. We know the tactics that you're engaged in right here. And then you just list a bunch of numbers. They remain resilient and resolved after more than 260 days at sea, 10,000 aircraft flights, and 1.5 million pounds of ordnance expended. The 1.5 million ordnance expended, which has gone to slaughter little girls in Manab and to kill innocent people as well, that's one of the things that's leading to the psychological torture that our troops are feeling aboard these supercarriers. And just saying 260 days, 10,000 aircraft flights, again, you're just saying numbers. What does it have to do with anything? That's not the story. The story is they've been out there for a very long time, that you're not giving them basic necessities in order to even live. And their family, are you saying all of their family members are liars? Are you calling our service members, the sailors and the Marines on those ships, and their family members who have reached out to Aaron Parnas and us and to others, are you saying they're liars? Are you saying that the San Diego families who were there calling out the top naval officials who were lying to them and who have treated their family members who have bravely sacrificed for our country and treated them like crap, are you saying those family members in San Diego are liars? Are you saying the family members who were on the virtual chat who were calling out this exact same deplorable conditions aboard these ships, are you saying that they're liars? How dare you? How dare you say that they're liars? This is coming from the family members. You wouldn't know that because, well, you do know that, but you wouldn't care because for you, this is all about your war crimes. This is all about whatever Donald Trump's deranged, these are my blockades of steel. No, you put our troops out there for way too long. You've depleted our interceptors. You've depleted our munitions. You've ran down our stockpiles. You destroyed our strategic petroleum reserves. Our MQ-9 Reapers are destroyed. Our bases are in horrible conditions right now. It's horrible. Here's what Pete Hegseth had to say about us. Here, play this clip.
Completely misrepresented. Listen, we make sure at every ship, every crew, every captain has everything we can provide them at every single moment. Some deployments are longer than others, and I have more respect and gratitude for those sailors than anybody. What they do in those high seas and those austere conditions with less port calls, it's incredible. I mean, Americans don't understand what it's like to do that. So as someone who's not been on a ship like that, but been on long deployments, I feel it. I want them home as soon as everybody else do. I want folks rotated as quickly as possible. I want the best for them. My commanders know that. Our service secretaries know that. The president expects that. And so to that crew and to all those crews, we're going to do everything we can for you. And we are so grateful for their dedication of that crew and others. They've held the line for the country, and they've done a fantastic job.
And so again, Senator Gallego says that he's in touch with the family and the spouses who have forwarded the text messages. Stop lying, Hegseth, and fix the problem. But let's remember, this is the CENTCOM who keeps posting things like this. This was a post from CENTCOM. The southern route through the Strait of Hormuz remains free and open for all commercial vessels seeking to transit the international waterway. Over the past 3 months, U.S. forces have assisted more than 1,000 vessels in successfully transiting the strait despite unwarranted Iranian aggression. And these transit continues today. Everybody, it's wide open. Everybody knows. Just stop with the lies. You've totally destroyed the credibility of CENTCOM. It's pathetic. We wrote on the Midas Touch account, we've heard horrifying accounts directly from family members and sailors aboard the USS Abraham Lincoln. We've seen firsthand communications from those on the carrier. The conditions they describe are deeply disturbing. We're not aware of the specific incident described by CENTCOM, but our latest reporting includes text message from those aboard who are receiving rotten meat and can't even get milk. We will continue exposing the truth about what is happening on the USS Abraham Lincoln. Here's what Aaron Parnas, who's been covering this, had to say. Play this clip.
I've spoken to numerous military families, specifically the wives of their husbands who are currently on board the Abraham Lincoln. And also now before we hopped on, received an email from someone on the USS George W. Bush who confirmed that the issues are there as well. I mean, ultimately, right now, our service members abroad are having moldy showers, are not getting detergent, not getting soap. They're not getting fresh fruit, fresh vegetables. Some service members haven't had a fresh meal in months. The only fresh food they get is meat. And well, the meat comes frozen. That's the only thing. And the images we're getting from these troops on these ships, I mean, prisoners in American prisons get better meal rations than these troops are getting right now in the Middle East. And it's led, as we've seen reporting today come out, to some service members wanting to essentially jump overboard rather than continue these deployments.
Here's what Senator Gallego, himself a veteran, had to say.
We haven't heard anything, and all we've heard is like public, announcements that what we're seeing, what we're hearing are absolute fabrications. However, I'm actually texting and communicating with a spouse of a sailor that's on the USS Lincoln, and she's been forwarding me some of the text messages that her husband has been sending her. About the conditions, about the work, about the overwork that's happening, the lack of sleep, lack of food, lack of morale, all these things that have just been compounding over and over again because this war was not properly planned. These guys do not care about these men and women. They only want to use them as much as they can and abuse them as much as they can and not really thinking about the best outcome for them. And I know it's hard being in combat zones, but even when I was in some of the hardest days of combat and some of the most dangerous parts of Iraq, I still was able to receive meals and mail and keep morale up. The fact that this administration does not care for these men enough to plan for that men and women to plan for a proper deployment tells you that they didn't really care, A, to plan about at all for a full war, and B, don't care about these men or women.
More from Senator Gallego right here. Let's play it.
Number one, they haven't done any port calls, so they haven't actually gone on into any friendly ports to actually refurbish or resupply or just have any type of just recreation. Number two, the food is from what I understand and talking to the sailor, is starting to dwindle. So people are getting less and less food, less and less quality food. The hours are going longer and longer in terms of people working with less sleep. And when you start adding all that up, it becomes a very dangerous situation. Aircraft carriers can be very dangerous. You have a lot of moving parts. You have a lot of airplanes, engines. You have people that could be falling over. And then plus the social isolation of just being on a ship for 270 days. This isn't a cruise ship, mind you. These men and women will have pressure that's put upon them, plus their jobs, plus being away from their families. And the fact that they're being pushed to the limit is going to cause some, unfortunately, mental breakdowns. And we've already heard about that, too. This is why you have to properly plan for war. This is why you understand when you're going to go into war and when you're going to come out of war and how you're going to come out of this war. This president and this Secretary of Defense did not do this. And this is why they're basically flying by the seat of their pants. And at the same time, it's our men and women that are suffering from it.
And here's what Congress member Moulton, also a veteran, here's what he had to say. Play this clip.
You heard the Navy. They tell us that they aren't seeing an uptick of mental health issues on the USS Lincoln. And they're saying they have plenty of mental health resources available. Listen, you're on the Armed Services Committee. Is that statement good enough for you?
Absolutely not. And we will be conducting an investigation to get to the bottom of this. 0 suicides is the only acceptable number. And I'm speaking not just as a veteran, but as the co-author of 988, the National Mental Health Hotline, a service that I made sure was available to troops, even troops overseas. It's pretty obvious, though, that these troops are not getting the mental health support that they need. And it's our job in Congress to get to the bottom of that.
And, CENTCOM is just a total mess right now. Here was the report earlier today. According to Israel's Channel 13, the commander of U.S. Central Command, CENTCOM, Admiral Brad Cooper, told Israeli officials during a recent visit that he is pushing for renewed strikes and a resumption of the conflict against Iran. Breaking, U.S. CENTCOM has denied Israeli media reports, claiming its commander, Admiral Brad Cooper, is pushing for a strike on Iran, calling the reports false. Look, Let me be clear, Cooper. You went to Israel the other day. You showed up there. You had to know that if you showed up there, Netanyahu was going to use you for propaganda. You were aware that Netanyahu was the person who told Donald Trump that Iran was going to blow up Air Force One. That's why Donald Trump, the pathetic coward that he is, hid on the food truck in order to escape the old Air Force One and go on the military plane. You knew that Netanyahu got us into this unlawful and catastrophic war. You knew that Netanyahu continues to kill people in Lebanon. He continues the genocide in Gaza. You realize all of that the Netanyahu government today said Syria will be our next Gaza. And then you showed up in Israel and you put your arm around Netanyahu and Israel Katz, their defense minister. His name is Israel in Israel. That's the guy's name, the defense minister. You heard what he said. We're never leaving Lebanon. We're going to destroy more villages there. And so you showed up. Of course, they're going to use you for that, Cooper. Cooper, you've completely beclowned yourself. You really have. You really brought shame to our military, Cooper. And from a lot of the top generals and admirals and people who I speak with, they all say that you've brought a great deal of shame to the military, Cooper, and that you should be ashamed of yourself for your behavior. You really should. Never have we had a CENTCOM leader so weak and pathetic and such a liar. And you've turned this account. We should be proud. I've always used to be proud of CENTCOM. And I think the best way you could be a real patriot is to say that Cooper's a loser and he's a liar right now. And it's sad that I have to say that. I hate saying that. But that's what he's proven to be with all of these ridiculous lies and can't manage the most basic logistics, idiot. Hit subscribe. Let's get to 7 million. Thanks for watching.
Breaking news right now. My brothers and I wrote a book. It's called WTF America. And well, doesn't that just say it all? It comes out officially this October, but you can pre-order your copy today. Just scan the QR code or click the link in the description below.
Today is the day we've been waiting for because today is the hearing where the Trump administration was in court trying to explain away why they didn't comply with the judge's order to release the full Epstein files. I'm joined now by Glenn. Glenn, you were in the courtroom today, in Judge Sullivan's courtroom. Can you explain what happened in court today?
Yeah, let me not bury the lead, Brian. I'm glad I was in the courtroom because I watched Judge Sullivan's frustration rise. His voice never did, but boy, did his frustration rise. And here is the money line. After lecturing the Department of Justice attorneys for 20 minutes on contempt of court, he said, and he said it twice, I will hold you in contempt of court if I have to. And that's not a threat. It's a promise. So, things got real in a hurry. Now, Brian, I know our viewers are probably already saying, well, it's wonderful that he is threatening, or more accurately, promising to hold them in contempt. But what results did it produce today? So let me back up and talk about what happened in court today. And it was a long hearing. It lasted about an hour and 40 minutes with a short break. So first of all, Judge Sullivan had ordered Todd Blanche and the Department of Justice to provide him certain documents. Why? because he would not take their oral representations for anything. He said, show me your work. I want the documents that back up what you're trying to claim. So, for example, we know that DOJ made a whole bunch of really strange redactions in the Epstein files before releasing some of them. It didn't seem like they were necessarily victims' names that were being redacted out. So the judge said, I don't care what you tell me. You show me the supporting evidence, the documents unredacted that prove to me that what you redacted were legitimately victims' names. Now remember, Todd Blanche was playing fast and loose because he said, well, they're victims' names or they are people whose attorneys asked us to redact out their names, claiming that in some way they were victims. So listen, the judge is having none of Todd Blanche's oral representations. Why? Because the presumption of regularity is gone. In other words, courts and federal judges no longer are willing to credit things federal prosecutors say. They want the hard evidence supporting these assertions. So it was really interesting because that was the first category of things that the judge took up in this hearing, the unredacted documents to prove you only redacted out victims' names. So after hemming and hawing and hemming, there was a lot of hemming and hawing that went on from this guy named Andrew Block, who I think has been at the Department of Justice for about a cup of coffee now, and they sent him in, and this is really horrific, Brian, they sent him in to be the willfully ignorant dupe, because as Judge Sullivan went through and asked him question after question after question, questions that any competent government DOJ lawyer should have been able to answer and would have done his homework to be prepared to answer it, he kept saying, Judge, I don't know. I don't have that information. I don't know. That's not available to me. And the judge said, wait a minute. You knew exactly what you were going to have to tell me today because I issued an order telling you what I wanted to know, and you're telling me you have no idea? Can you get somebody on the phone at the Department of Justice who can answer these questions? Again, his voice didn't rise, Judge Sullivan, but his frustration level did. So finally, at the end of the hemming and hawing, this was unbelievable because Andrew Block held out as long as he could, and then when he saw the tide had completely turned against him, he says, Judge, I have a binder here full of some of the documents regarding these redactions of victims' names. Can I hand them up to the court? To which I'm saying to myself in the audience, why didn't you open with that, sport? Right. So that was like his last attempt to kind of deflect and stave off a contempt ruling. So he handed them up to the judge. The judge said, well, thank you for providing this. I will look at it and take it under advisement. They then moved on to the second category, and it's going to take me a minute to lay out, because the second category is really the danger zone for Donald Trump. The second category of documents that Judge Sullivan ordered them to produce, and they failed to produce, were the handwritten notes, some 30 or 40 pages of handwritten notes documenting interviews by a 13-year-old victim alleging that Donald Trump sexually assaulted her and physically assaulted her, battered her, punched her. And all they did was turn over a typewritten summary, what's called an FBI 302 report. He said, I want to see the handwritten notes because there's a ton more information in there than the typed up summary that you ultimately disclosed. And you have failed to provide it in violation of my court order. And the judge started asking Andrew Block questions. How many pages of typewritten notes? I don't know. What are you having problems redacting out of the handwritten notes? Your Honor, I don't know. And the judge was having none of it. So the judge ultimately turned to the plaintiff's counsel, Katie Fang and her attorneys, and said, I'm inviting you to submit an order with respect to these handwritten notes from the victim. And we don't know what that proposed order is going to be. I hope, Brian, it is a proposed order for the judge to sign that says you will be in my chambers Friday close of business with the handwritten notes, or else contempt is coming your way. But we have to see because he didn't go that far. So, Brian, the third category, and there's a lot to unpack here. The judge said, listen, the Epstein Files Transparency Act, the federal law, clearly states that for any redaction you make, you must, that redaction must be, quote, accompanied by justification that you publish in the Federal Register, a publicly available register for all to see, and you haven't done it not once for all the thousands of redactions that appear in the documents that you did deign to disclose. They actually said, well, but Judge, the Epstein Files Transparency Act doesn't set a deadline. Well, the language is, if you redact something and disclose it, it must be, quote, accompanied by a justification in the Federal Register. Tells me that those things are supposed to happen at the same time, kind of what accompanied by means to the layperson. And so,
and by the way, that deadline was December 19th, 2025.
It was. And this is one of the lighter moments, and I'm going to look down at my dozen or so pages of copious notes. So the judge pressed Andrew Block over and over again, saying, how much time do you need? What would you like me to set by way of a deadline? Do you need a week? Do you need 30 days? Do you need 60 days? And he wouldn't answer the question. I don't know, Judge. I don't know. I don't know. He finally said that, well, I am told by some of my superiors at the Department of Justice that they're working on it, and that, you know, these justifications that need to be published in the Federal Register are, quote, forthcoming. And Judge Sullivan snapped back, yeah, Christmas is forthcoming. That doesn't tell me anything. You can, again, my voice is rising because I get agitated at the injustice of this all, but Judge Emmett Sullivan's voice did not rise, but his frustration level did. So basically, the judge is probably going to set a hard and fast deadline. And then, Brian, the fourth and final category is foreign documents. There are foreign language documents in the Epstein files that by law must be translated into English. And this DOJ attorney actually said, well, it just wasn't all that practical for the people reviewing these documents to translate them into English. And I think by this time the judge was just fed up. He took a break. He said, I'm going to go back to chambers and I'm going to kind of ruminate on some of this, and then I'll be back out to talk some more. When he came back out, Brian, it was story time. What he did was he said, I presided over a case against a United States senator, Senator Ted Stevens. Some of our viewers may remember that prosecution of, I believe, the longest-serving senator at the time, Ted Stevens from Alaska, who was prosecuted for failing to disclose, financial benefits he was being given. And he said, you know what the prosecutors did in that case? And he was clearly sending a message to the prosecutors sitting in the courtroom. They failed to turn over some 33 or 34 exculpatory documents that could have been helpful to Ted Stevens' defense. They violated the Constitution by failing to turn over those helpful documents, that exculpatory evidence, which the Constitution requires prosecutors to hand over to the defense so they can use it to defend themselves against the charges. He said, and they refused and they defied me. And you know what I did? I walked into court one day and I said, I'm holding you all in contempt, period. And you know what? After I held them in contempt, the next day they produced the documents to the defense. This is I will hold you in contempt, and that's not a threat. It's a promise. He kept saying, I don't want to do it, but I will. So that is the way he left it. It was kind of an ominous way to conclude the hearing. He actually said, I don't need you to say anything in response. I just don't want anybody to say they were blindsided if contempt comes your way because you're, my words, playing these games and you can't even answer straight factual questions that you knew I would ask in today's hearing. And with that, he concluded the hearing and he walked off the bench.
So what does contempt look like if that's the avenue that's ultimately followed here?
Civil contempt, which is what he was talking about. He wasn't talking about criminal contempt. Those are two different things. I can touch on both of them. He expressly was talking about civil contempt. Civil contempt is designed not to punish the person who is in contempt, who's defied orders. It is designed to compel compliance with the orders. So civil contempt can look like imposing a $1,000 a day fine personally on the government lawyers. They might be reimbursed, but let's set that aside, until they purge the contempt by complying with the order. And that was the story he told about the Ted Stevens case. He finally held them in civil contempt, And the next day they complied with the order, and he vacated the contempt finding. But you know what he also made clear, Brian? That he is on what's called the Judicial Tenure Committee and has been for 21 years. He's been on the federal bench for 41 and a half years. I've appeared before Judge Sullivan. You don't try his patience, and you don't think you can talk your way out of anything in front of Judge Sullivan. So he was talking expressly about civil contempt as a way to force, to compel these lawyers to provide the damn documents. In fact, at one point, he actually said, the American people want to know what the hell is going on. That is a quote. So that is what he is contemplating, civil contempt to force compliance. However, the next step, if you violate civil contempt and you're still not in compliance with the order, then you can be punished with criminal contempt. Now, mind you, that's a whole different process. A judge can summarily hold somebody in civil contempt, literally with a bang of his or her gavel. But criminal contempt requires sort of a mini trial to be held, a very abbreviated trial. But the person who might be found guilty of criminal contempt, a crime, has those wonderful rights that we've heard so much about in, for example, the Abrego Garcia case, notice and opportunity to be heard. So they can mount a mini defense before the judge decides if they are in criminal contempt. And if they're in criminal contempt, they can be jailed. So, there are different ways to compel compliance. There are different ways to punish people who are defying court orders. But right now, as of right now, the judge is starting by not threatening, but promising civil contempt.
Now, contempt aside, based on your vantage, because you were in the courtroom today, does it feel like Judge Sullivan is ensuring that we're actually going to get some transparency on the Epstein files now? I mean, it almost feels like a joke at this point because these things were supposed to be released 9 months ago. Todd Blanche obviously has zero intention of releasing them. And as you mentioned, when Judge Sullivan was asking how much time they would need, and the flunky who was sent in from the DOJ wouldn't even give a straight answer, it's not because he didn't know, it's because they have no intention of releasing these things. They didn't even do the accompanying disclosure reports. And so there was never any intention of releasing the Epstein files. So they don't need 30 days or 60 days. They don't need any amount of days because they don't want to release them. But does it feel like Judge Sullivan is going to ensure that they actually do comply with the law? Or is there some way from your vantage that they'll still try to circumvent this stuff?
Yeah, it's a great question, Brian. This feels like gamesmanship, which is probably the nicest thing I can call it, by the Department of Justice. I agree with you that, and actually, Katie Fang's lawyers for the plaintiff stood up and said, we don't believe they have any intent of complying with Your Honor's orders. And so it feels like it's a game being played. A couple of things I'll say about whether we're going to see full transparency. One, I do think this suit has only been up and running for a couple or a few months now, which I know sounds like a long time, but in the life of civil litigation in federal court, it's really not. So what Judge Sullivan kept saying is, I don't want to know what's in these files for my own benefit. I am here to make sure you comply with the federal law and that the American people and journalists like Katie Fang get access to what the law provides they should get access to. So I think we're probably going to begin to see some transparency with respect to whatever it is these DOJ lawyers did deliver today, and I think very soon will be ordered to deliver or be held in contempt for failing to deliver. But, that's just obviously a small subset of the Epstein files. What I do think we're moving in the direction of, albeit far too slowly for my taste, your taste, and the taste of the American people who have been waiting since December 19th for full transparency. I think eventually Katie Fang asked the judge to say, Judge, you're going to have to appoint a special master to review all of the Epstein files because DOJ is playing games and they can't be trusted. So, listen, Judge Sullivan understands that in part he has to give them enough rope to hang themselves with, figuratively speaking, and that's what he's trying to do by, among other things, slow walking them in the direction of criminal contempt, giving them every opportunity to fully comply with his court orders. Do I think we're going to see full transparency? Probably not during the lifetime of the tenure of Todd Blanche. heading up the Department of Justice because he is still acting as Donald Trump's criminal defense attorneys, and he is there solely to protect Donald Trump's interest. I think the most telling point, Brian, is the most pitched battle is being fought over not disclosing 30 or 40 pages of handwritten notes taken by FBI agents of 4 interviews of a 13-year-old who alleged Donald Trump sexually and physically assaulted her. That should tell us everything we need to know. And mind you, there is no legitimate exception to turning those over. And Judge Sullivan threw that right back at these DOJ lawyers because all they could come up with was, well, Judge, those notes are kind of duplicative of the typed up reports and they're substantially verbatim. And the judge said, yeah, and you know what? The Epstein Files Transparency Act does not have an exception for duplicative or substantially verbatim documents, so you need to turn the handwritten notes over first to me, and then I suspect he will disclose what he believes must be disclosed in accordance with the federal law.
Well, obviously, a lot to stay on top of here and more to come on this topic in particular. So for those who are watching, if you want to stay on top of this news, the best way to do that is to subscribe to both of our channels. I'm going to put those links right here on the screen and also in the post description of this video. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown. It looks like after a long dormant period, we are now one step closer to actual transparency as far as the Epstein files are concerned. So Glenn, can you talk through what we can expect in the aftermath of a successful ruling in Katie Fang's lawsuit against the DOJ?
Yeah, Brian, the presiding judge, Judge Emmett Sullivan, is calling Todd Blanche to the carpet. More precisely, he's hauling him into court in just a couple of days because Todd has got some splaining to do. Because Judge Sullivan issued an order, actually 2 orders, one in June and one in July, directing that Todd Blanche provide some of the unredacted Epstein files and some of the documentation behind the decision that prompted Todd Blanche to make some of those, let's just generously call them highly questionable redactions. And guess what? Todd Blanche blew it off. He didn't do it. He defied Judge Sullivan's order. You would expect better from an acting attorney general, particularly one who is hoping to be the permanent attorney general. I mean, this is just a level of abdication of the responsibilities of an attorney general beyond anything you can make up. So Judge Sullivan said, okay, Todd, then I'm setting a hearing. You're going to get your butt into court. You're going to bring me the materials. I'm going to set some deadlines for you. This feels like Judge Sullivan walking Todd Blanche in the direction of contempt of court if he doesn't straighten up and fly right. Now, frankly, I hate that we give these dirty DOJ officials so many bites at the complying with orders apple, but this is where we are. So let's break it down. There are 3 categories of things that Todd Blanche has basically, thumbed his nose at the court when the court has ordered him to provide these things. Category 1, and this is all from the brand new order just issued by Judge Sullivan. The first category involve documents that Todd Blanche made a whole bunch of redactions from. And he claimed that these redactions were all of victims' names or victims' personal identifying information. But here's the problem. Judge Sullivan ordered that Todd needs to provide to the court for private review in chambers, called in-camera review, the backing documentation. Because if a name is redacted and the name is Jane Smith, and Todd Blanche says, oh, Judge Sullivan, just take my word for it, Jane Smith is a victim. Judge Sullivan said, Todd, I'm not taking your word for it. I need the damn documentation because you have no presumption of regularity. The judge didn't say that, but that is the inference if you read between the lines. So he didn't bring the documentation. Now he's being hauled into court due to that failure, that defiance of the court order. And here is something I want to bring to everybody's attention in category 1. Todd Blanche actually said, well, some of these people are victims, or some of these people had lawyers that asked us to designate them as victims. Can I play that out for just 30 seconds, Brian?
Yeah.
If Prince Andrew's lawyer said, I would like you, Todd, to designate my client as a victim, Did Todd do it? If Ghislaine Maxwell's lawyer, who happens to be a friend of Todd Blanche's, said, you know what, in an abundance of caution, let's just go ahead and label Ghislaine Maxwell as a victim. So if you wouldn't mind redacting her name out in some places that might be particularly damaging, I'd appreciate that, buddy. I don't know if that went on, but boy, that is the flavor of the game that Todd Blanche seems to be playing. That's category one. Category two is even worse, arguably. Category two involves a 13-year-old victim who was repeatedly interviewed by the FBI 4 times. Inferentially, it seems she was found to be credible. And the only thing Todd provided were some formal write-ups, some typed-up reports about what all those interviews involved. And then Todd, is playing a little bit of a shell game because he tells Judge Sullivan, well, all of the, I think, dozens, like 30s or 40s pages of handwritten notes of all of the interviews of this 13-year-old victim who, by the way, reported that Donald Trump sexually and physically assaulted her some years ago. All of those handwritten notes are, and I quote, duplicative of what ended up in the few typed reports that we did provide. And because it's substantially similar, what's in the handwritten notes and what's in the typewritten reports, and duplicative, we're not going to give any of it over. You know what Judge Sullivan said? And this is just brilliant. He said, well, you know what, Todd? There have been other disclosures that you actually have made from the Epstein files in which you affirmatively say, we're giving you document number 1 and we're giving you document number 2, which is substantially similar to document number 1 and duplicative, but we're going to give them both to you anyway. Brian, why is Todd Blanche willing to give substantially similar and duplicative documents over publicly when they have nothing to do with Donald Trump, but when they have everything to do with a direct allegation by a victim against Donald Trump, they pull out the substantially similar and duplicative excuse to not give over the good stuff, the more complete stuff that in real time was being recorded as the victim was sharing her experiences with the FBI. And Judge Emmett Sullivan was having none of it. He said, no. You will bring the damn documents. He didn't say damn, but I can't help myself. There's a third category. That third category, again, this is so transparently in violation of the Epstein Files Transparency Act. Judge Sullivan said, listen, the law says, the federal law that's on the books says that you must publish in the Federal Register for all to see the basis of any redaction you made. Brian, do you know Todd Blanche hasn't published a single entry in the Federal Register of any of the who knows how many hundreds or thousands of redactions he has made? That's just blatantly in violation of the federal law and has been every day since the deadline of December 19. Here's what Todd Blanche actually said in his own defense. He said, Judge, there is no deadline for us to publish the reasons for these redactions in the Federal Register. And Katie Fang and her lawyers tended to disagree and said, actually, the deadline set in the federal law was December 19 for all of this. So the judge said, okay, so there's a dispute, Todd, as to the deadline. You come on in, get your butt into court, bring all the documents that you have thus far defied my order and refused to produce, and I'll go ahead and set a deadline for you. How about that? So I'm taking liberties here just for emphasis, but these are the 3 categories of things that Judge Sullivan said directly. You failed. You defied my orders. You're going to comply now or else. So stay tuned, because in the coming days, we're going to have that. They're going to have that hearing. I'm going to be in court to, monitor it all in real time and then jump on with you immediately upon the conclusion of the court hearing so we can bring it all to our audience, in real time, including the color commentary from inside the courtroom.
And again, for those who are watching, to stay on top of this stuff as it breaks, because Glenn will be in that courtroom, please make sure to subscribe to both of our channels. Glenn, it's worth asking here. Obviously, Todd Blanche is in that position having had no intention of releasing any more files. As you mentioned, rightly, the date that all of these files were supposed to be released was December 19th, 2025. It is now August of 2026, so this is going on 9 months, 9 months that these files were supposed to be put out there. The administration also offered up some commentary that basically suggested that any Epstein file stuff went out the door with Pam Bondi, that she was responsible for everything. Now that Todd Blanche is in, clean slate, they don't have to worry about this anymore, and nothing else has to be released. The Epstein files matter is shut as far as Todd Blanche is concerned. So clearly they have every intention of continuing to suppress all of this. Is there going to be any way for Todd Blanche, maybe using his position as acting attorney general, or who knows, maybe attorney general by then, to not comply with Judge Sullivan's order that demands that he come in, that demands that he offer up the quote-unquote duplicative documents that aren't actually so duplicative, or this idea that, he can categorize co-conspirators or accomplices as victims? I mean, is there any way for him to be able to kind of undermine this whole process because of the position that he holds?
There are a couple of ways. One, he can continue to defy judicial orders, and he can basically challenge the court into forcing him to comply or holding him in contempt. Let me tell you, don't sleep on Judge Sullivan. I could launch into any number of stories. I appeared before Judge Sullivan. I have enormous respect for him, but he was as hard on federal prosecutors as he was on any other attorney, civil, criminal, who appeared before him, because he expects the best from us, as he did when I was a federal prosecutor appearing before him. So he will work in the direction of holding Todd Blanche accountable if he continues to defy orders. Or Todd Blanche can just kind of try to take endless appeals of each and every order issued by Judge Sullivan. I don't know how far that will get him. And let me just comment on what you said at the beginning of the question, where because Pam Bondi left the Department of Justice, the Epstein files disclosure obligations under federal law are somehow over. Well, there are a couple of things that contradict that. One, Pam Bondi told Congress, I turned this whole dang thing over to Todd Blanche. He was in charge of the whole Epstein files, compliance issue. So I don't, that dog won't really hunt. The other thing, saying that somehow if a new attorney general comes in, all existing legal obligations under federal law are somehow extinguished or mooted out because now there's a new attorney general. I don't know. Do defendants get to say, oh, well, I wasn't successfully prosecuted under the last attorney general, and now that there's a new one, I guess my case is over. Come on, Todd. It doesn't work that way, and he knows that. So I think what this is ultimately going to come down to is a bit of a pissing contest between the court and the Department of Justice, between Judge Sullivan and Todd Blanche. And what I can tell you is that Judge Sullivan don't play. And if he has to hold Todd Blanche in contempt, and this thing finally comes to a head with our first contempt proceedings in court, Judge Sullivan is up to that task. But let's see what happens at this next court hearing. And my hope, quite frankly, Brian, is that ultimately Judge Sullivan will say, listen, Todd, I've caught you defying my orders so many times, or playing games once I did get my hands on the underlying documentation because it tends to contradict what you told me. I'm ordering the Department of Justice to produce to a special master all of the Epstein files, and that special master and a team that I put in place to assist the special master will see how much stuff you may have unlawfully retained to protect goodness knows who. I hope that is kind of the end game for this litigation.
Last question on this. Let's say Judge Sullivan does move forward with a ruling like that. Is there any way for Todd Blanche to immediately appeal this up to ultimately the Supreme Court to try and offer some temporary restraining order or injunction against having to comply with Judge Sullivan's order?
Never say never. So the answer is yes, he can try. And ordinarily, a judge saying, listen, I have lost confidence in a Department of Justice that has been defying my orders and making misrepresentations to me. And a court has significant discretion to require the government to produce things privately in camera to be shared with nobody, including the defense. Mind you, there was an earlier ruling when the judge said, I want you to provide me some of these materials privately in camera in my chambers, not for public consumption. And Katie Fang's lawyers actually took the position, Judge, we would like to be included in that so we can at least see. We will sign a protective order, meaning we can't disclose it publicly beyond our defense team. And Judge Sullivan said to Katie Fang and her lawyers, no, I, as the judge, will be looking at this privately. Why? And this shows what a good jurist he is, what a good judge he is. Why? Because maybe there are things that you shouldn't see because they were appropriately redacted. So you're not going to be part of that process just yet. That shows that, the judge is really thoughtfully going about this and protecting the rights of both parties. But ultimately, Brian, DOJ can always try to appeal first to the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals and then to the Supreme Court. I don't think this is the kind of issue that should have any traction, but with today's largely compromised 6-justice right-wing majority, never say never.
Well, of course, this issue is really fast moving. We'll have some answers here in less than a week. As Glenn mentioned, he'll be in the courtroom on the 13th as these proceedings move forward. So if you'd like to follow along and hear more of our legal analysis, the best way to do so is to subscribe to both of our channels. It's 100% free, but again, a great way to support our work and support independent media. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown. We now have an update from the Trump administration in court that is so brazen and so damning, I almost couldn't believe it when I saw it. Glenn, I'm going to put right here on the screen the fact that the Trump team appealed a lower court order against Trump's $1.8 billion slush fund and his sweetheart IRS immunity deal. Trump is now challenging that in the 11th Circuit in Atlanta. So how can Trump both say that this thing is dead, don't worry about it, we don't even need written confirmation that it's not moving forward, while at the same time trying to resurrect it in the court?
Are you accusing Donald Trump of talking out of both sides of his mouth, Brian?
Apparently.
Because, it's so, like you say, it's so effing outrageous that he just tried to cram down America's throat. Todd Blanche, his de facto personal attorney, as the permanent attorney general for the people of the United States. All the while, Todd Blanche was swearing up and down, though only verbally, not in writing, that no, this deal is not going forward. This settlement agreement creating an $8.1 billion cop beaters fund, for Donald Trump to distribute as he sees fit. No, it's done. It's dead. It's not going forward. And then the minute Todd Blanche's confirmation looks like it's no longer in play and Donald Trump is going to have to shelve his nomination, at least for the time being, what happens? Oh, by the way, we are appealing the judge invalidating the very settlement agreement that produced a $1.8 billion cop beaters fund. How much more transparent can he get that he is trying to just, pull the wool over the eyes of the American people, over the Senate? I mean, thank goodness we had two senators, Tillis and Cornyn, who weren't falling for Todd Blanche's bullshit, and they held up the nomination. The corruption is so in our face. The lies are so obvious and transparent, and they just gleefully tell them day in and day out. And unfortunately, corporate media always seems to be willing to downplay it and move on to the next outrageous Trump post, which is really doing the American people and democracy a disservice. But, as you say, it's absurd, it's brazen. And if there's any good news here, a little bit of a point of light, I think he's going to fail miserably in the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals. In fact, I think he might get excoriated by even his own judges who he appointed to that Court of Appeals, who in substance kind of tore him apart previously in connection with some of the Aileen Cannon rulings. Remember that Trump toady who was forever doing favors for Donald Trump in her capacity as a federal court judge down in Florida? I mean, I think the judiciary is on to Donald Trump. I think they're done playing his reindeer games. They're done doing his bidding. They've certainly taken the gloves off and gone scorched earth after he and his administration. But the Supreme Court, we've always got those 6, ideologues, those right-wing radicals, and in fact, they really are on the Supreme Court. So I can only believe that Donald Trump's play at this moment is to work his way up and maybe get this thing in the hands of, Alito and Thomas and Gorsuch and Kavanaugh and Coney Barrett and the Chief Justice himself, John Roberts, and maybe, just maybe, they will, completely disregard the rules, the law, and the Constitution as it applies to a litigant's ability to bring suit. Because this suit stunk from the moment it was filed, and the federal court judge, Kathleen Williams, told Donald Trump so, invalidated the agreement that was reached. And not only that, Brian, Judge Kathleen Williams said this lawsuit was brought in bad faith by Donald Trump. She said this lawsuit was a product of collusion between Trump and his own executive branch. And she said there was no adversarial position, which means no lawsuit can be brought in court. Why? Because Donald Trump sued Donald Trump. Donald Trump negotiated a settlement with Donald Trump, and Donald Trump gave Donald Trump everything Donald Trump wanted. And that is why Judge Kathleen Williams threw the damn thing out. And it wouldn't surprise me if the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals affirmed Judge Williams' ruling and had some choice words for Donald Trump in the way he tried to, and I'll quote Judge Williams one more time, manipulate the courts and the legal process.
You had mentioned the fact that legacy media will see this and just move on. So to that end, for folks who are watching right now, if you'd like to support our work and if you enjoy these deeper dives into what's going on so that you can actually understand as opposed to just watching a 3-minute hit, the best way to support our work, which is completely free, is to subscribe to both of our channels. Those links are in the post description of this video. So if you're not yet subscribed, please go ahead, support independent media and subscribe. But it's worth asking here, as Trump engages in this litigation in court, where he continues to appeal this thing up to the 11th Circuit and hopefully up to the Supreme Court, can his statements in public or Todd Blanche's statements in public be used against him? Because they're claiming in court that they support this slush fund and also the protection from IRS audits, but in public they're pretending that they don't want anything to do with it, and they're claiming that it's dead as a doornail. So how can those public statements, including stuff that Todd Blanche is saying to even Republican senators during his confirmation hearing, impact his ability to be successful in court?
Yeah, it's a great question, Brian. Anytime one of the parties to the case, either the plaintiff or the defendant, makes an out-of-court statement, that statement can always be admitted against that party. So anything that Trump says publicly that would be relevant to and perhaps damaging to Donald Trump's, never-ending court battle in this case can certainly be introduced as evidence against him, can be used against him. But here's the thing. Now that we are moving from the trial court, which was Judge Kathleen Williams' province, she was the trial court judge, up to the Court of Appeals, you don't introduce evidence before the Court of Appeals. The record is set once you are done in the trial court. For example, you don't have witness testimony. You don't introduce new evidence by way of documents or out-of-court statements in the Court of Appeals. The record is sort of set in concrete once the trial court has concluded its case. It doesn't mean that, the parties can't talk about how their case is really bolstered, about how what went on in the trial court should either be affirmed, as one party will say, or should be overturned, as the other party will say. They could certainly allude to the congressional hearing and what Todd Blanche said and what he wouldn't say, some of the things Donald Trump has said or posted. But technically, it doesn't become evidence up in the appellate court, because that's just an oral argument about what happened in the court below. But, what it does is it exposes all of this as an absolute stone-cold sham and a manipulation. Because as much as Todd Blanche said over and over and over again, the weaponization fund is not moving forward, senators reasonably said, oh, well then lawyers would tend to put in writing the rescission of a settlement agreement. That's kind of the way lawyering works. And Todd Blanche is like, I'm not going to put anything in writing. I mean, that is like the mob approach to taking on this issue, right? Don't send emails. Don't put anything in writing. Don't talk on a phone because it might be tapped, right? That's what Todd Blanche and Donald Trump really are. They're like third-rate gangsters running our government. But Brian, as I say, I look forward to seeing what the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals says about this manipulation of the court system.
To that end, Glenn, is there anything to suggest how the 11th Circuit might rule on this? Do we know the composition of the panel that's been drawn? Do we know the general composition, partisan lean of the 11th Circuit? And frankly, is there anything to suggest how even Trump-appointed judges might rule on this issue?
You know, the only thing that gives us a little bit of insight is how the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals ruled in the classified documents case that came before them a couple of times based on Judge Aileen Cannon's completely out-of-control rulings that were not supported by any case law anywhere, but she was forever trying to do favors for Trump. Right. And twice, the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, there were 3 judges on the panels. I don't remember all of the judges, but I do know for one of the rulings, 2 of the 3 were Trump-appointed judges. And they said Judge Aileen Cannon abused her judicial discretion by doing something for Donald Trump that the law does not allow. And so, I mean, that gives you a little bit of insight into at least how the Trump-appointed judges can be completely independent and can rule against Donald Trump when he is supported by neither the facts nor the law. But at this moment, the notice of appeal was just filed by Trump, so we don't know the 3-judge panel. And what I will tell our viewers, even though people may be a little bit skeptical of this, these really are random assignments. So whatever 3 judges are next up in the pecking order, those are the 3 judges that will be assigned to the 3-judge panel that will hear this appeal. Now, ultimately, if Donald Trump loses, and we're in this bizarre upside-down world, because, mind you, Donald Trump sued Donald Trump. He sued the IRS, which he completely controls. Remember how he says Article 2 means I can do anything I want as president because I'm basically the Article 2 emperor, the ruler of all things. I own everything in the executive branch, and of course, he has been governing that way. So it was Donald Trump who sued his own IRS, which he controls, so he really sued himself. And now Donald Trump has appealed the ruling that went against him. But is the IRS going to oppose that ruling when the IRS is, controlled by Donald Trump? This whole thing is in the bizarre upside-down legal world, which is one of the reasons Judge Williams said, you can't sue yourself. You can't sue an agency that you completely control. And that's why this lawsuit cannot even be brought in federal court, because the Constitution requires a case or controversy with 2 separate parties that have adversarial positions to one another. That's just another one of the many reasons I think this thing is destined to fail in the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals.
Last question on this. Glenn, if you can't even bring this case, then who is able to sue and where do they sue to stop this from happening? Like, if this lawsuit goes away, then what's to stop Trump from just saying, there's no lawsuit preventing me from doing it, so I'm just going to barrel ahead and pay myself $10 billion from the IRS? Who has to step in and say that this can't move forward if the lawsuit that's occurring right now, there's no case or controversy, so there's not even really standing to bring it?
Brian, I sure wish that aggrieved taxpayers, we're having our tax dollars stolen from us virtually every day by Donald Trump and his corrupt administration. I wish there was a cause of action. I wish we as taxpayers had standing to bring legal challenges when our tax dollars are not just being squandered, right? This is not fraud, waste, and abuse. This is corruption. This is crime. This is theft in a very real sense of our tax money. But, repeatedly the courts have held that aggrieved taxpayers can't really bring lawsuits to challenge how the government is spending our tax dollars. Maybe that's something we will reconsider moving forward when we go on the reform and accountability mission come January 2029. But what I will say is there are a lot of very creative and inventive law firms and nonprofit organizations that are filing legal challenges to Donald Trump's actions every day, and they are winning. So I can only hope that one of them will take up this cause and find a party who does have standing to challenge this. But it's really hard when it's Donald Trump suing Donald Trump. I mean, who's going to have, standing to intervene in that or to bring an independent lawsuit? It's a tough question, but I do believe we have lots of good nonprofits that are probably working on that even as we speak.
Something tells me that Norm Eisen is on the ball in a big way. To that end, for those who are watching right now, again, if you'd like to support our work, if you enjoy our legal analysis, the best way to support us is to subscribe to both of our channels. Those links are right here on the screen and also in the post description of this video. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.
I also want to ask you about something a little closer to home. There is a colleague of yours in the Ohio delegation, Max Miller, who is facing allegations of abuse from an ex-wife of the wife and his then toddler daughter. Do you think that Max Miller, who denies this abuse, should he resign from Congress in light of the accusations?
Look, this is a family matter. I know Max is a good man. I was up campaigning for him. I hope he wins re-election. He's done a good job as a member of Congress, and we should all pray for his family. These are difficult times that they're going through. We understand that. These kind of situations always are. But Max is a good member and a colleague, and hopefully he's going to win re-election. But ultimately, in the end, that's up to the voters in his district. But yeah, we were up helping Max just a few weeks ago at a campaign event up in his district in the northern part of our state.
So, I mean, it's just worth noting, I mean, the allegations include that Miller scalded his ex-wife's chest and stomach when he threw hot water at her, that he held a gun to her head, that he pushed her against a wall and hit her in the head, that he fractured their daughter's collarbone and bruised her shoulder, that his 2-year-old daughter reportedly told his ex-wife, quote, "Daddy, kill you." I want to play for you what you said when you were asked about Graham Plattner, who faced allegations of abuse. Let's watch what you told. I've not
heard all this stuff.
Well, it was in the New York Times. It was in the New York Times. That's the list of allegations. It's been out there for a while. I just want to show you what you told Newsmax when you saw that Graham Plattner was facing these accusations. Watch.
That's always been the case with Democrats. It's all about maintaining power. They will take any crazy position as long as it furthers their ability to win elections and get power, and frankly, to go against anyone who goes against President Trump.
Why does that not apply here to Republicans who want to keep power in the seat?
Well, I don't know the context of the question I was asked about Mr. Plattner, but my guess it was about all the ridiculous positions he's taken.
The banner there says Plattner's ex-girlfriend accuses him of abuse.
The Nazi tattoo and everything else. Yeah, well, I don't know. I didn't answer. I don't know that I answered that question. I think I was dealing with just who he was as a candidate and the crazy anti-Semitic, anti-Israel, pro-Nazi positions that he has taken. I think is evidenced by the fact that he had a Nazi tattoo on his chest.
All right, Congressman Jim Jordan, thanks for spending some time with us.
And frankly, it wasn't me that kicked him off the ballot. It was the Democrats.
All right, fair enough, sir.
So that was Jim Jordan bumbling his way through an interview where he is forced to reconcile his past zero-tolerance policy as it relates to Graham Plattner and Democrats purportedly excusing this disgusting behavior, even though Plattner was literally pushed out of the race by Democrats, while at the same time refusing to condemn Max Miller as he's accused of heinous and possibly criminal behavior, which I'll get to in a moment, simply because Miller is a Republican. In other words, Jordan is guilty of committing the exact same apologia that he wrongly accuses Democrats of engaging in and can't even grasp the hypocrisy. Now, to give everybody a better idea of just how depraved this behavior that Jordan is defending here is, here's an excerpt from Mother Jones. In mid-March, 2 detectives, an Ohio County Division of Children and Family Services caseworker, and a Cleveland Clinic physician met on Zoom to discuss how the 2-year-old daughter of a congressman and granddaughter of a U.S. senator wound up with a broken collarbone. Quote, "The bruising surrounding the clavicle fracture made the injury suspicious," wrote one of the detectives, who summarized the Zoom meeting. Further, someone on the call advised the injury would have required a high degree of impact to occur. Neither the child's father, Representative Max Miller, a Republican of Ohio, nor mother, conservative policy advisor Emily Moreno, admitted to knowing what caused their daughter's injury or that it occurred while their daughter was under their care. Miller's primary theory was that the bruising resembled marks from a seatbelt. Moreno, who discovered the bruises and took the child to an emergency room, suggested the cause may have been something more sinister. Records of the investigation into potential child abuse show that Moreno told detectives that Miller had previously thrown hot water at her, shoved her, and held a gun to her head. Therefore, she couldn't rule out that Miller caused their daughter's fracture. Moreover, a child protection specialist reviewing the incident had characterized the bruising near the fracture as resembling a handprint. Quote, "Daddy's house is scary," Moreno recounted her daughter saying, according to a Bay Village, Ohio investigative report relating to the February 2026 injury. If you can't condemn that, then you are beyond redemption as a human, period. And that goes for Jim Jordan just as much as Senator Bernie Moreno, who, as far as I can tell, has not publicly called on Max Miller to resign, even as just yesterday, his daughter filed a restraining order against Moreno's colleague, Max Miller. And yet, nothing from this Republican senator, although apparently he's got all the smoke in the world for an 85-year-old doctor.
Those policies were put in place because you had moronic politicians that listened to the words of a megalomaniac who was more interested in having met a Kardashian than the suffering of the American people. And that is you. Your advice to communities like that, to idiotic politicians who enforce those rules, arrested that mom for watching a football game with her own family outside. When that story broke, I said to myself, I cannot stand idly on the side and watch this happen. It was about 6 years ago today that I decided I'm going to give up my businesses, sell them all, run for office, run for the United States Senate. Here I am sitting in front of you 6 years later saying, who the do you think you were for doing that?
Wow, look at that tough guy. Some harsh words for a doctor who's guided this country through decades of health crises and who Republicans have now decided is their brand new boogeyman because, God forbid, they blame the asshole who said that COVID was cured by injecting disinfectant. But that tough guy has no words whatsoever about his own daughter reportedly contending with shocking acts at the hands of his own Republican colleague. But hey, party of family values, am I right? So when Jim Jordan says that Max is a good colleague and he hopes he wins re-election, I want everybody watching this video and listening to this video to imagine that your own mom or aunt or daughter or sister experienced the things that Max Miller is accused of doing. And then imagine Max's colleague, knowing these things happened, advocating for him to stay in power, to stay in his job, and complimenting him on his performance. That's the level of depravity that you're dealing with in Jim Jordan and the rest of his Senate conference. There is nothing too disgusting, too depraved, too illegal, too criminal that would ever supersede their insatiable desire for more power. Jim Jordan put as much on full display for the entire country to see. Before you go, one quick request. It's become clear to me that this White House is dead set on preventing me from reaching any audience. Trump's decision to put me as the first name on his enemies list is a testament to that. But it didn't quiet down then, and I won't do it now. So please do me a favor and subscribe to this channel, hit the notification bell to be alerted when I post new content, and tune in when I publish videos so that they get picked up in the algorithm. The link to subscribe is right here on the screen. And together, let's make sure that we send a message to this administration that all they're doing by attacking me and independent media is making our platforms all the more powerful. Thanks. We've got a civil war erupting within Trump's inner circle. So here's what just happened. Back in June, the Trump administration spent $14 million on a rushed renovation of the reflecting pool. Time to look nice for the America 250 celebration. Almost immediately, the new liner started peeling. Rather than admit that the $14 million rush job was, in fact, a rush job, the administration decided the far more convenient story was vandals did it.
We had vandalism. No, vandals. You know, we have I think 290, 300-foot slit right through it. Probably a box cutter or a knife of some kind.
Somebody went in with a knife and cut it. They cut it up good. And then they cut a 200, 350-foot slip in the form of lots of little slips. Real horrible stuff.
They took razors and they started cutting this, very expensive stuff. We caught some people vandalizing our beautiful reflecting pool. They tried to destroy it. They cut it up with a box knife and tried to destroy it.
Yes, those elusive vandals. Well, they needed a body to pin the blame on, and so they found that, a 67-year-old former Olympic canoeist named David Hearn. And Jeanine Pirro's office indicted him on a felony destruction of property charge, accusing him of, quote, forcefully and violently pulling up and removing the bottom liner with both hands.
Today, a grand jury has returned a felony indictment against a defendant, David Hearn, for felony destruction of property, for which he faces 10 years in prison. The indictment is in response to an incident that occurred on June 19th of 2026, in which the defendant Hearn ripped a piece of recently installed sealant on the bottom of the reflecting pool at the Lincoln Memorial. The evidence shows, and we will prove beyond a reasonable doubt, that Hearn willfully destroyed property at the Lincoln Memorial reflecting pool. This was a deliberate act to damage the reflecting. Pool at the National Mall that members of the National Park Service actually have worked hard to restore and have witnessed. By Hearn's own admission, on June 19th, he reached down into the pool. Our evidence further shows that the National Park Service employees observed Hearn actually forcefully and violently pulling up and removing the bottom liner with both hands. According to witnesses, Hearn damaged approximately 2 square feet of sealant from the bottom of the pool. A Parks employee actually told Hearn to stop his behavior and stop what he was doing. Hearn reacted by shouting at that Parks employee, saying that she cared too much about the reflecting pool, and why did she even care, since it wasn't her pool.
In fact, Pirro went so far as to call the evidence against Hearn tremendous.
Everything that the police do in this jurisdiction is reviewed by my office. We review it. This is a case with tremendous evidence, and this is a case where the evidence dictates where we land.
Interior Secretary Doug Burgum said that he was 100% sure that vandals were responsible.
Peeled off. Why? Why did that happen? Do you know?
It didn't peel off. There was vandalism. There was box cutters. There have been 7 arrests. There was people literally trying to destroy part of a monument. The reflecting pool is not just a pool on the mall. It is part of the Lincoln Memorial. And if anybody says that they're going to go and vandalize that, it's no different than if someone was throwing paint.
And you're
on Lincoln
100%
itself.
sure that what happened with the liner was vandalism. You can prove it.
Oh yeah, absolutely can. And as we drain it, and we've got all the photographs we can see. I mean, there's no possible way.
There are photographs of a person or people cutting a 300 or 350 foot gash in the bottom of the reflecting pool?
Dana, I'm not sure why you and others in the media think that you want to keep trying to question whether or not this is an industrial liner. Every farmer and rancher in America that's had their pickup liner lined by this sprayed on liner knows that you literally it would never just like peel off or fall off. This is like a strong material.
Yeah.
And it's the size of 8 football fields. And the only way you can end up with actual slices in one spot and not the other is that someone physically cut it.
So that's a lot of promising up and down by Donald Trump, by Doug Burgum, by Jeanine Pirro, all of his people. Only small problem, none of it was true. On Friday, Pirro's own office filed a motion to drop the case, admitting in writing that the damage was, quote, the result of a botched installation and not vandalism as initially represented by DOI. DOI being Department of the Interior. According to the filing, a National Park Service engineer had flagged the liner peeling weeks before Hearn was ever arrested. And the filing went further than that. It said the Interior Department withheld documents, video, and other evidence from prosecutors until after the case had already gone to a grand jury, and that if DOJ had gotten that information up front, they never would have sought the indictment in the first place. In plain English, that means the Department of Interior handed federal prosecutors a case built on a lie, let them indict an innocent 67-year-old man on a felony, and only fessed up to it once the wall started closing in. So Pirro, seeing the writing on the wall, dropped the charges because now it's clear that there's no case, which prompted Trump to take to Truth Social, writing the following, quote, I disagree 100% with Jeanine Pirro, the U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia, on the reflecting pool. I don't know what she was thinking. To me, it was a pure case of vandalism that included the grass, which had a big 8647 emblazoned on giant letters on it, and the other elements of the surrounding areas. There may have been some contractor difficulty, but the major damage was caused by vandals. President DJT. Now, this is Donald Trump attacking one of his most devoted allies, a woman who spent years as a Fox News mouthpiece for him, for the crime of her admitting, under oath, in a legal filing, that the emperor's $14 million pool has no close. To be clear, Pirro had no choice here. The Department of Interior already let the cat out of the bag. If Pirro didn't drop the charges, she would be prosecuting someone who she knew, under documented evidence, was innocent by her administration's own admission. But of course, Trump's reaction wasn't, relief that an innocent man wasn't going to go to prison. It was fury, rage that the official story was contradicted. And I think that tells you everything you need to know about this White House. It's not about what's true. It is about what version of events is convenient for Trump. The Interior Department needed a scapegoat so that nobody would ask hard questions about a botched $14 million contract. The DOJ needed a headline about cracking down on vandalism at the national landmark. And when the actual facts got in the way of both of those goals, the truth wasn't the thing that mattered to Donald Trump. Loyalty was. Even Jeanine Pirro, who is so far up Trump's ass that she could touch the back of his teeth, was apparently worthy of attacking here. Now, Norm Eisen, who represents David Hearn through Democracy Defenders Fund, released the following statement saying, quote, Trump and Burgum are attacking Pirro because she admitted what we established in our legal filings all along. Trump's botched renovation was responsible for the damage, not Davy Hearn. However, Pirro's claim that she and her office were previously duped by Interior is nonsense. Starting immediately after arraignment, our motions repeatedly prove that the administration was to blame for the reflecting pool failures, not Davy. This is far from over as we consider all legal remedies. Now, to be clear, I'll be interviewing several attorneys, including Norm Eisen and Mark Elias, about the consequences for someone like Jeanine Pirro and her law license. So if you want to see that coverage, and trust me, I think you will, then please make sure to subscribe to this channel. But going back to Trump, this is somebody who spent an entire campaign railing against a two-tier justice system, against prosecutors who chase narratives instead of facts, against the purported weaponization of the DOJ. And the second his own hand-picked prosecutor admits that his administration weaponized the DOJ against an innocent man to cover up their own botched job, Trump doesn't apologize. He doesn't thank her for correcting the record. He goes on Truth Social and attacks. That is not somebody who cares about justice. It is somebody who only cares about protecting his own fragile ego, no matter whose life has to be destroyed in the process. Before you go, one quick request. It's become clear to me that this White House is dead set on preventing me from reaching any audience. Trump's decision to put me as the first name on his enemies list is a testament to that. But it didn't quiet down then, and I won't do it now. So please do me a favor and subscribe to this channel, hit the notification bell to be alerted when I post new content, and tune in when I publish videos so that they get picked up in the algorithm. The link to subscribe is right here on the screen. And together, let's make sure that we send a message to this administration that all they're doing by attacking me and independent media is making our platforms all the more powerful. Thanks. We now have definitive proof that Jeanine Pirro, Donald Trump, Doug Burgum all lied in order to try and indict somebody, David Hearn, who was completely innocent, claiming that he had destroyed the reflecting pool. So my question for you, Mark, is going to be, what are the impacts to somebody like Jeanine Pirro's law license for moving forward with an indictment that she knew wasn't true? Before you answer that question, I want to show some footage that we have of these people claiming up and down that there was vandals who were responsible for the reflecting pool's damage.
It didn't peel off. There was vandalism. There was box cutters. There have been 7 arrests.
The defendant Hearn ripped a piece of recently installed sealant on the bottom of the reflecting pool.
And you're 100% sure that what happened with the liner was vandalism. You can prove it.
Oh, yeah, absolutely can. And as we drain it, and we've got all the photographs, we can see.
Our evidence further shows that the National Park Service employees observed Hearn actually forcefully and violently pulling up and removing the bottom liner with both hands.
So that was both Jeanine Pirro and Doug Burgum claiming that they had tremendous evidence against David Hearn, that it was 100% the fault of vandals. Back to the question, what happens in terms of the ability for somebody like Jeanine Pirro to keep her law license knowing that she abused it in this way?
Okay, so first of all, they didn't try to indict David Hearn. They did indict David Hearn. So, there was real damage here. And anyone who thinks that, look, in the end, justice was done, doesn't understand the trauma of being David Hearn, who has done nothing wrong, literally nothing wrong. And then, as you say, essentially gets framed by the Department of Justice and the Department of the Interior for a crime he didn't commit. Now, luckily, it blew up on them before it got much further, but we need to be clear about that. Brian, when I saw the back and forth between the filings in the Department of Justice and then the clips you just showed, it reminds me of Rudy Giuliani. Remember Rudy Giuliani on November 7th, 2020? He's in the parking lot of the Four Seasons landscaping business. And he is saying how there's massive fraud in Pennsylvania and they proved massive fraud. And then the next thing you know, he shows up in a courtroom and the judge is like, is there fraud? And he's like, no, Your Honor, we're not saying there's any fraud. Right? Yeah. In the end, that didn't save Rudy Giuliani. In the end, the damage that has been done here by Jeanine Pirro, by anyone else who is licensed to practice law, they're trying to mitigate it. It is clear that whether it was Pirro herself or some underling in the office, someone on Friday was like, we need to try to clean this up so that this doesn't become a huge bar problem, a huge ethics problem, a huge, frankly, civil liability problem if Hearn decides to sue. But I'm not sure it's going to work because the damage has been done. And, these claims were made, these outrageous extrajudicial statements were made, which, by the way, federal prosecutors are not supposed to make statements outside of the courtroom. They're not supposed to prejudice the jury or prejudice the judicial system. So I think this is quite serious. Now, for Burgum, that's a different thing, right? He's just a guy who made a lot of money, became the governor of North Dakota, and then essentially sacrificed his reputation to be one of Donald Trump's sycophants. That's a whole other episode we could do, in which we could list. You could show it. You could do a marathon session of people who have fallen in that camp.
Yeah. Now, in terms of Jeanine Pirro, you mentioned David Hearn potentially exercising his right to sue. Does Jeanine Pirro shoulder any personal liability here by virtue of allowing this sham process to move forward?
So, look, I think it's going to all depend on what the sequence of events were and who was involved in what. Now, I think it's going to strain belief that somehow Jeanine Pirro will be able to say, well, look, we're a big office. We got a lot of stuff going on. I didn't really know much about this case.
I mean, right. I mean, look, I played those clips in the beginning. She said, quote, she had tremendous evidence against David Hearn. I mean, she was pretty full-throated about the extent to which she was absolutely certain that he had done something wrong.
It kind of reminds you of the Pam Bondi with the list of, the Epstein... What was the list she had on her desk?
Oh yeah. I mean that was the list of other co-conspirators that she had right on her desk.
Right on her desk. Yeah. And then later it's like, oh wait, no, that thing never existed. Yeah. I think Pirro is is not going to be able to escape the consequences of this. If, in fact, she made these statements without having that evidence, as it appears she did. If, in fact, they had contrary evidence, which it now appears they did, now she's going to say they didn't have the contrary evidence till later, but still, the question is, how the hell did this case get indicted without having the full file from the Department of Interior, if that's what their argument is? How did she make these extrajudicial statements? Like I said, prosecutors are not supposed to make these extrajudicial statements anyway. And one of the reasons is because you smear people who are presumed innocent, right? Every criminal defendant is presumed innocent. And here you have a situation where not only was the guy presumed innocent, turns out he was actually innocent.
Right. And that's become commonplace in this administration, where the second something happens, you have Kash Patel, Jeanine Pirro, Dan Bongino, Donald Trump, anybody from a position of authority, especially within these law enforcement agencies, who immediately come out and view their job as being to paint a narrative regardless of what the facts say. And frankly, nearly every single time, they're completely wrong. I mean, Kash Patel has like an almost incredible proclivity to be dead wrong on every single word that leaves his mouth, especially as it relates to the ICE shootings, for example. But that's what these people view their jobs as being.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because, one of the ways this could be mitigated is by the legacy media showing some skepticism. When this first came out, if you go back and watch Brian's videos on this from day one, Brian wasn't buying this. Okay, like nobody in their right mind was buying the story that the Park Service and the Department of Interior and that Jeanine Pirro, former Fox News host, was selling. And it would be better, still would be, a potential ethics issue and all that, but it would be better if the legacy media hadn't presented the Trump version of this as if it is possibly true. I just want to give you some of the headlines from today. This is after the indictment has been dismissed. The Washington Post: Trump insists vandals damage reflecting pool, blasts DOJ for dropped charges. Hey, Washington Post, how about you take a position there? Like, what do you mean? Yeah. Trump insists vandals damaged reflecting pool. Yeah. Like, can't you come out and say at this point that that's actually not true?
Right. I mean, even Trump's own administration has come out and said it's not true. It's not that much of a courageous stand to be able to come out and say what even the White House is saying now.
Yeah. Here is Politico. Trump dings longtime ally Jeanine Pirro for dropping reflection pool vandalism case. There was no vandalism. What do you mean dropping the vandalism case? There was no vandalism. Like this is the thing, everyone. If you have not already, I need you to subscribe to this channel. Okay. I need you to go ahead and hit the button to subscribe to this channel. And then I need you to hit the bell to get alerts when there is new content, because the legacy media is to this day going to both sides of this. And Brian, through a series of interviews with high profile elected officials and candidates, through a series with me and with Glenn Kirshner, with his own commentaries, he even does some comedy. He is keeping you up to date and giving you not the both sides version, but what's really going on. So do me a favor and go ahead and subscribe now.
And I would also be remiss not to mention that if you're looking for all breaking legal democracy voting rights news, there is no better resource than Democracy Docket. So that's the news outlet Mark founded to focus on everything voting and elections. I'm going to put that link right here on the screen and also in the post description of this video. At this point, that is my go-to source, the only source that I'm using for all things voting rights, democracy, legal news. So please, if you're not yet subscribed, do yourself a favor, especially as we're coming up on midterms and this stuff is only going to get more important, and subscribe. Mark, is the bar... Well, I know there is no one bar, but are the bars in each respective state equipped to handle this kind of abuse? And I presume that we haven't seen anything like this before, where we have these attorneys who are in positions of extreme power, who are abusing those positions in deference to Donald Trump's extrajudicial activities. Are the bars now equipped to be able to deal with these people, and are they equipped to be able to deal with them fast enough to basically catch up to the speed with which they're committing these corrupt actions?
Yeah, I think the second part of your question is really the challenge, right? I think the bars would say, yes, of course, we are equipped to deal with this. After all, the New York bar, look what it did with Rudy Giuliani. The DC bar would point to a number of instances, John Eastman, right? Which I think was California, right? Like the bars would say they do this. The problem is what you point out about speed, right? The bars don't move fast. And they take not just days and weeks, but months and years. And the problem with Donald Trump is he's the president today, right? Jeanine Pirro is in office today. Todd Blanche, another one, by the way. Like, where's Todd Blanche other than right now apparently hiding under his desk around this, right? I mean, are we to believe Todd Blanche didn't know about the criminal prosecution of something that the president of the United States was touting as like the crime of the century? So this potentially has a fairly wide radius of people who could be involved, and they are all in power today. We saw Todd Blanche get crosswise with the federal judge in Florida over, his handling of the slush fund. And we could be doing a whole episode on that, about how Donald Trump, after Todd Blanche testified that the slush fund is dead and gone, what did Donald Trump say? It's alive, right? So all of these lawyers around Donald Trump make compromises, and oftentimes they cross the line, those compromises. And the bars will say they handle it, but the problem is, Brian, it's not fast enough. And on top of all of that, we need this to end, right? We can't continue to have this. And one of the challenges that we're going to face is at some point Democrats are going to retake power. And we cannot obviously abide by these kinds of abuses. Democrats are never going to do this thing. But we also can't go back and think that after everything we're seeing going on with this administration and Jeanine Pirro and the press and all of that, that we're somehow going to go back to the days of Merrick Garland. So I want to just sort of turn the tables and ask you a question, because you wrote a great book that just came out about what Democrats should do when they come back into power. And I want to make sure everyone goes out and buys that book. If for no other reason, I wrote the foreword to the book, and it's a really good book, and it's a great foreword. So we're going to put the link to buy the book in the description of this episode and on the screen. But Brian, what do you think we do with the Department of Justice when Democrats retake power?
It's such a good question. And I think that it is the perfect kind of microcosm for Democrats actually wielding power, which is the whole point of this book, because the refusal, the unwillingness, the inability of Merrick Garland to actually hold power to account, to seek justice without fear or favor, is why Trump feels so emboldened right now to commit these crimes, because he feels like nothing is going to happen. And frankly, nothing has happened. So I'm not surprised that he feels that way. And so I think that we need to revamp the Department of Justice immediately and start holding all of the corruption and criminality that we're seeing right now to account. I don't want to hear anything about, we want to prevent the optics of politicization. We want to just let bygones be bygones. We want to start a new era. That exact mentality is why we end up in a place where politicians feel like they can be as corrupt as they want and nothing will happen. So we need, in the immediate aftermath of all of this, an actual DOJ that even though somebody is committing crimes and they're a politician, that they actually hold those people to account for what they've done. So we need a commission, I don't know what you want to call it, a commission to look at everything that's going on right now, whether it be financial crimes, whether it be, these short sales on the stocks that we're seeing on a daily basis, whether it's trading tariff rates or other benefits, national security advantages to other countries in exchange for real estate deals or whatever it may be. All of this needs to be looked at. And I think that if you actually care about having a functional country moving forward that relies not just on having a proactive agenda, which is just as important, but also making sure that the criminality and the corruption are held to account so that we don't ever land ourselves in a situation where we see this happening again.
Right. And that's so important, Brian, because that goes beyond just the bar complaints that can get the lawyers. That does get the Trumps. That does get the Burgums. That does get, whoever else is involved in this mess.
The fish rots from the head. And I think if you're not going to be willing to hold the most powerful people to account, you can't be surprised when the less powerful people also act with the same level of disregard for the law. Last question here. Is the threat of disbarment enough of a deterrent for these people like Jeanine Pirro, like Todd Blanche, who exist so immersed in this right-wing ecosystem that even if they don't have a law license, there's still, it feels like there's some opportunity for them to do something, and by the way, get rich doing it?
Yeah, so I've thought a lot about this, right? I've asked myself this question over and over again. Why is a guy like Todd Blanche, just to pick one of them? You know, this is a guy who was former federal prosecutor in Manhattan, a partner at a big New York law firm. Like, why is he willing to sacrifice all of that, jeopardize all of that to get the brass ring of being Donald Trump's attorney general, right? Like, so, and so the question you asked is a really good one. I'm not sure it is that they think, well, on the other end, you know, even if they suffer consequences, you know, it'll all work out. I think that what Donald Trump is really a genius at is he gets them to compromise themselves at the beginning. I mean, we started this in some sense with Rudy Giuliani. I mean, think about a guy, this is a guy who was like, you know, the most popular politician in America after 9/11. Yeah. This is a guy with a sterling reputation. He could have gone on to do anything. Like, you know, people thought he'd be the next president of the United States. He could be, you know, teaching law. He could be giving speeches. But Donald Trump sucked him in and ultimately ruined the guy. I mean, ultimately destroyed the man. Now, I'm not letting Rudy Giuliani off the hook, just like I'm not letting Jeanine Pirro off the hook, or for that matter, Doug Burnham or Todd Blanche or Jay Clayton or any of these. I mean, they're all adults and they all make their own decisions. But you got to think about the ability of Donald Trump to take people who have independent reputations and have those people sacrifice every shred of dignity. And by the way, in the end, Brian, does Donald Trump ever stand up for any of them?
No. Other than Donald Trump, no. So I think that's the whole story right there. By the way, on just a quick note on the Giuliani thing, I grew up like a kid in New Jersey. I had a signed picture of Rudy Giuliani and Joe Torre on my childhood bedroom to put on full display the fall from grace that Giuliani is engaged in right now. With that said, this is all very much a live ball. I presume that in not months, not weeks, but in days, we're going to see some referral to Bar Council as the direct result of Jeanine Pirro's misguided effort to indict an innocent man here. We will, of course, bring that to you as soon as we have any update. For those who are watching, if you want to stay on top of this news, please make sure to subscribe to Democracy Docket. That link is right here on the screen, and I'm going to put a link to subscribe to this channel so you can see more episodes of Democracy Watch right here on the screen as well. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
I'm Mark Elias.
This is Democracy Watch. I'm joined now by the former communications director for Barack Obama and co-host of Pod Save America, Dan Pfeiffer. Dan, you wrote something that caught my attention in a pretty big way. I'm going to put it right here on the screen. If you're a Republican on the ballot, this is the number that should scare the shit out of you. And so what you were referring to was the fact that Trump's job approval among non-college white voters in 2018 was 9 points in the positive. In 2020 was 8 points in the positive. In 2025 was 24 points in the positive. Now that number, as of July 2026, is negative 8 points. 8 points in the negative. So we're looking at a 32-point swing from just when Trump was elected 2 years ago. Talk to me about that number and why that number in particular was such an important metric for you to comment on.
Sure. To give you one other stat with this, according to exit polling, Trump won that group of voters by 34 points. Like, white, non-college educated voters, white working class voters are the core of MAGA. They are his base. They have been his most loyal voters. They're the ones who have stuck with him through 2 impeachments, an insurrection, mounds of corruption. And it seems like they are beginning to sour on him. And that has dramatic effects on what the MAGA coalition looks like, how big it is. But what would really worry me with Republicans is these are the voters you have to turn out. And if they are not going to turn out, if they are not excited about Trump, if they are pissed at Trump, if they think they broke her promises, that is bad news for particularly Republicans in places like Wisconsin and Michigan, where white non-college educated voters make up a huge swath of the population, and Maine as well. I put Maine on that list.
And so that's the point I want to dig into here, because this is Trump's approval rating. So how do you reconcile the correlation between Trump's approval rating and the other Republicans who are not named Donald Trump who are going to be on the ballot? I mean, do they get any leeway, or is Trump's approval rating going to be directly correlated with how poorly his own party does?
I mean, I suspect if Republicans on the ballot cannot outperform Trump's approval rating, which is 32%, then they're going to lose in every seat in the country, basically. They will outperform Trump. But what the way to think about it is every point that Trump's approval rating goes down, particularly among this group, the white non-college educated voters who make up his base, that is more of an anvil on the shoulders of these Republicans. It makes it harder for them to win. It is more, they are swimming upstream against it. And so an unpopular Trump and a Trump who's there's a world in which Trump's, is at 37, 38, but the bulk of it is independents, Democrats, some of these voters who will vote in presidential elections and not vote in midterms. This group right here, these are the people, these white non-college educated voters are the ones he needs to turn out, and they're unhappy with him right now.
Well, the irony of this is, you look at one of the most criticized moments of Kamala Harris's campaign. It was on The View. She was asked what she would do differently than Joe Biden. She refused to break with him on anything. She refused to even put forward one single idea that she broke on him with. And so, in effect, Biden's unpopularity became her unpopularity because she refused to put any space between them. Now Republicans are falling for the exact same phenomenon where, they have refused to serve as a check against him on anything except for, John Cornyn and Tom Tillis, both of whom don't have a job after this term. But the rest of them have hugged him. They haven't run away from him. And so in a way, even after having watched Kamala Harris fall for this exact phenomenon, they're doing the same. They're repeating her mistake in this election cycle where his unpopularity is weighing all of them down.
It's interesting because the dynamics are both similar and different, right? Where these Republicans on the ballot are dealing with an unpopular president of their own party. Kamala Harris was dealing with an unpopular president of her own party. Now, Kamala Harris outran Joe Biden's popularity by 15 points or so. He was in the maybe about 10 to 11 points, I guess, is probably where Biden was at the end.
Yeah.
And some of these Republicans will outrun Trump by at least that. The reason why they're in a bigger pickle than Harris was is that Biden was there was not a ton of strong enthusiasm for Biden among Democratic voters. She had a freedom to break with him that these Republicans feel like they do not have because there are a couple, when you look at polls, you can cut these in several ways, right? You can do it by education and race, like we're talking about here. Another way to do it is you get the Republican sample and you say, do you consider yourself a member of the MAGA movement or not? MAGA voters still love Trump. His numbers are in the 80s with them. Now, that group is getting smaller as people are leaving that group, but the problem for Republicans is they need those quote-unquote MAGA voters to turn out for them. And if they break with Trump, he will punish them publicly in a way that could further diminish turnout against their base. They really are in a situation. I imagine in 2024, Kamala Harris could have broken with Biden on some issues like Gaza or the border or inflation, and it would not have affected Democratic turnout in any measurable way. I think here these Republicans are really weighing what to do. You stick with Trump, you pay the price with swing voters and soft Republicans. You break with Trump, you pay the price with turnout.
Hey, y'all, listen, I'm streaming. I'm on vacation, goddammit, but I brought you some content, so send them donations.
There you go.
Double tap that screen. Subscribe, niggas. I'll be